Exposed, what the narcissist truly thinks about you now after a long separation. Have you ever stopped to wonder what runs through a narcissist's mind after months, or even years, of your silence? On the surface, they appear fine, smiling on social media, showing off a new life, maybe even flaunting someone new. But psychologists describe this as the classic mask of narcissistic fragility. Inside, they are restless, haunted by the absence they cannot control. Your silence, your refusal to respond, becomes a haunting echo, a reminder that the power they once held over you is slipping. For a narcissist, separation isn't merely about losing someone they claim to love. According to Dr. Craig Malkin and other experts in personality disorders, it's about losing control. Every unanswered message, every day without contact, gnaws at their sense of authority. They once assumed you'd be there, ready to forgive, ready to chase their attention, ready to prop up their ego. Now, your silence becomes deafening, louder than any argument, more painful than any confrontation. One of the first secret thoughts a narcissist entertains is the hope that you will return. This is their psychological crutch, their method of coping with abandonment. They imagine you breaking the silence, reaching out, or giving them one last chance. But as weeks turn into months without a word, that comforting illusion collapses. Anxiety and insecurity begin to creep in. Psychologists note that this oscillation between hope and reality mirrors the intermittent reinforcement they often impose on others. They are now trapped in their own cycle. They obsess over whether you still think about them. Even if they claim indifference publicly, research shows narcissists have a profound preoccupation with how they are perceived. Your silence becomes a riddle they cannot solve. Do you miss them? Do you despise them? Or have you erased them completely from your life? That uncertainty gnaws at their pride because not knowing equates to a loss of control, a concept central to narcissistic vulnerability. Another thought that haunts them is the rewriting of history. Narcissists cannot tolerate being cast as the villain. Their minds constantly reconstruct the past to preserve self-image. I was misunderstood. I was unfairly abandoned. Psychologists describe this as an ego-protective mechanism. Deep down, however, they feel the tension of truth, the knowledge that they were not blameless. This internal contradiction torments them quietly, even if they never admit it. They fear that you have moved on. The thought of your happiness without them is more agonizing than criticism or hatred because it proves you were never dependent on them. Psychologist Eleanor Greenberg emphasizes that narcissists experience a profound threat when a former partner thrives. Your growth becomes a mirror reflecting their loss of control. Your laughter with friends, your flourishing career, your newfound confidence. These are all silent indictments that their influence was never absolute. Validation, once effortlessly supplied by you, is now withheld. The absence of constant affirmation, the compliments, the reassurance, the emotional attention, creates an internal famine. According to Dr. Wendy Behoy, narcissists rely on external validation to sustain their fragile self-esteem. Your silence starves that need, leaving them to wrestle with emotions they cannot process. They envy your resilience. Every step you take forward, every moment you live fully without them, is proof that their manipulation failed. Psychologists note that this can trigger covert resentment and a subtle compulsion to reclaim control, often manifesting in imagined scenarios. Liking a social media post, sending a vague message, or orchestrating a test to see if you're still emotionally tethered. Yet, your steadfast silence often paralyzes them more than any confrontation ever could. Ultimately, narcissists are trapped in their own obsession, helpless, unseen, and haunted by the very person who chose silence. Dr. Malkin describes this as a combination of fragile self-esteem, entitlement, and deep insecurity. And that, more than anything else, is what they fear: irrelevance. To a narcissist, being forgotten is a psychological death, worse than hatred, worse than exposure, worse than failure. And your silence delivers it, quietly but irrevocably, every single day. They secretly wonder, what if I try? And then remember you won't respond. That thought alone is unbearable. Psychologists explain that narcissists operate as if life is a constant contest of power and domination. To them, relationships are a game they must always win. Your silence is proof that their control is gone, and that reality gnaws at their pride. They lie awake at night asking themselves, how did I lose control? Because for a narcissist, the fear of defeat outweighs even the fear of rejection. They also obsess over whether you still harbor hatred. In their distorted logic, hatred is better than indifference. Even anger directed at them grants them power. It proves you still feel something. But your silence? Silence strips them of that validation. Psychologists call this the control vacuum effect. When someone refuses to engage, narcissists feel destabilized, desperate to reclaim influence they can no longer grasp. They imagine conversations that will never happen, rehearsing ways to justify themselves, painting themselves as the victim, constructing arguments in which they are right. This mental theater comforts their fragile ego. They think, if only I could explain, they'd see my side. But reality doesn't bend to their will. You aren't listening anymore, and that truth unsettles them profoundly. Even from a distance, they watch. Social media, mutual friends, casual mentions. They seek crumbs of your life. Psychologists describe this as surveillance for control. They measure your independence, your happiness, your distance from them, all to gauge how much influence they still wield. Yet silence denies them these answers. They feel entitled to your attention, your forgiveness, even your suffering. Your refusal to give them any acknowledgement feels like theft. How dare they cut me off? Your silence whispers into their ego, challenging their core belief in entitlement. Psychologists explain that narcissists interpret withdrawal not as boundaries, but as punishment, and they cannot endure it. Regret surfaces, not the healthy kind, not remorse for their cruelty, but bitter regret for losing control. Their inner narrative isn't about your pain, it's about their loss of influence. They replay moments in their mind, wishing they had manipulated better, controlled more tightly, ensured you remained dependent. This self-centered regret traps them in an endless loop, circling the same haunting thoughts. Your peace becomes their torment. Psychologists point out that narcissists cannot tolerate seeing calmness or serenity in others when they themselves live in perpetual restlessness. They envy your freedom, your quiet strength, your ability to move on. Why can they be at peace while I'm trapped in chaos? They wonder. Without your energy to dominate, they are left with the raw emptiness of their own minds. Fear of exposure haunts them. Your silence might hide secrets they cannot bear to confront. Secrets of manipulation, lies, betrayals. Even if you speak no word, paranoia creeps in. Do others know the truth? That question alone torments them because they understand their carefully constructed mask is fragile and ready to shatter. And they wonder, secretly, obsessively, how you found the strength to walk away. You were supposed to stay, forgive, bend, and serve their narrative. Your courage, your silent defiance, exposes the very weakness they've worked so hard to hide. Psychologists note that witnessing this autonomy in others triggers both fascination and rage in narcissists. Admiration and resentment tangled in one toxic knot. They fantasize about returning, imagining scenarios where you fall back into their orbit. But deep inside, fear dominates. The fear of rejection, the undeniable confirmation that you are no longer theirs to command. Your silence has become the punishment they never anticipated. Invisible, undeniable, and devastating to the core of who they believe themselves to be. They once believed anger, arguments, even tears would tether you to them, because in their mind, emotion meant engagement. Psychologists explain that narcissists rely on emotional reactions as a form of control. The louder you react, the more they feel powerful. But silence? Silence was never in their script. They find it disorienting, terrifying even. They think, why aren't they reacting? That absence of response gnaws at them more than confrontation ever could because it leaves them powerless, stripped of their primary tool, manipulation. Behind closed doors, they secretly question whether they underestimated you. They may have dismissed your inner strength, assuming you would always forgive, always return. After a long separation, the thought creeps in, maybe I didn't know them at all. Psychologists call this a cognitive dissonance moment, when their expectations collide with reality. The realization that you were stronger than they imagined unsettles them profoundly, shaking the foundation of their ego. Even your happiness tortures them. They may insist to themselves that they don't care, yet their minds obsess over your smiles, your laughter, your freedom. They envision you building a life they cannot touch, and it burns their fragile sense of superiority. How dare they find joy without me? They think. This cruel irony, psychologists note, stems from narcissistic entitlement, the belief that others exist to validate their worth. While you thrive, they stagnate in bitterness, consumed by envy disguised as concern. They cling to illusions of temporary loss. This silence won't last forever. They'll need me again, they tell themselves, a mental lifeline against the terror of permanence. But as weeks and months stretch on and your distance holds, those cracks widen. Psychologists describe this as the slow erosion of narcissistic fantasy, the painful realization that control may be permanently gone. Thoughts of revenge surface, often masked as self-improvement. They flaunt new relationships, achievements, lifestyles, not for genuine fulfillment, but to provoke you, to prove they won. Yet deep down, every move is still motivated by you. The obsession lingers, subtle but relentless, a psychological tether they cannot sever. Testing boundaries becomes a dangerous mental game. They imagine messages from hidden accounts, chance encounters, subtle provocations, anything to pierce your silence. But fear dominates. The fear that your calm, unbroken distance will remain unyielding. Psychologists describe this as the anxiety of unpredictability. Silence denies them certainty, and uncertainty terrifies them. They resent your healing. In their worldview, you were supposed to crumble without them. Your growth, your calm, your confidence, your freedom, is a mirror reflecting their weakness. How could they do that without me? This realization shatters their narrative of power and control. Psychologists note that witnessing autonomy in someone they once dominated triggers deep narcissistic rage and envy, sometimes internalized as self-hatred. Exposure haunts them. The thought that you might reveal their lies, manipulations, or control to others creates a shadow of paranoia. To them, silence isn't safety. It could be preparation, a brewing storm of accountability. They obsess over being unforgettable, clinging to the illusion that you'll never erase them. But as you thrive, doubt creeps in, and that doubt is unbearable. It threatens their carefully constructed self-image. Being forgotten, psychologists emphasize, is a narcissist's deepest fear, a wound they cannot allow to heal. Finally, they see you as the one who got away. Losing you, they realize, was their greatest defeat. I thought I had them forever, but I was wrong, they admit to themselves in the private theater of their mind. That silence you chose is not absence or weakness. It is proof of victory, a demonstration that their power has finally ended. And the cruelest irony? They once wielded silence as a weapon against you. Now, facing it in return, they feel its full, devastating force. They think this isn't fair, but deep down, they know it's justice. Psychologists explain that narcissists thrive on control. The very weapon they wielded against you, manipulation, silent treatment, emotional coercion, is now reflected back at them. For the first time, they are powerless, and that truth wounds their fragile ego. In secret, they wonder if your name still slips into conversations, if you still mention them to others. Narcissists obsess over being remembered. Psychologists note that narcissistic self-esteem is externally fueled. Being forgotten triggers a terror unlike any other. They tell themselves, as long as they speak of me, I still matter. But silence, your refusal to react, strips them from your narrative. When you erase them even in thought or speech, it's a wound they cannot conceal. Relevance, or the lack of it, becomes their deepest fear. They secretly fixate on your independence. They once assumed you were fragile, dependent, incapable of making choices without them. Psychologists describe this as the shattering of narcissistic entitlement, the internal panic that comes when the world contradicts their grandiose self-image. Watching you thrive without their influence forces them to confront an unbearable truth. If they don't need me, then who am I? That recognition gnaws at their sense of power and control, leaving them unsettled. Their minds wander to reputation control. They whisper lies, distort stories, shift blame, hoping that manipulating perceptions will restore their ego. But deep inside, psychologists note, they know the truth. Your silence shields you, preserves your dignity, and reveals their desperation. The absence of reaction is a mirror reflecting their irrelevance. They cling to the illusion that time is on their side. Eventually, they'll return. They think, counting months and years as if your silence is temporary. But every day that passes unbroken chips away at their fantasy. Psychologists call this cognitive frustration, when a narcissist's expectation of inevitable return is shattered by reality. Time, once a tool of manipulation in their mind, now becomes evidence of your strength. They even dwell on karma, not as spiritual justice, but as a personal reckoning. The loneliness, failed relationships, emptiness they experience gnaws at them because, unconsciously, psychologists observe, they recognize the consequences of their actions. It's punishment they cannot name, but they feel it deeply. Your forgiveness, or rather, your refusal to respond, is another silent dagger. They crave absolution, imagining your words, "I don't hate you. I've moved on." Psychologists note that narcissists seek external validation to soothe guilt. But your silence denies them that fix. In truth, your quiet is forgiveness itself, a release they cannot control or manipulate. They realize your growth. They secretly acknowledge that you have become resilient, self-reliant, and beyond their reach. Psychologists call this the narcissistic injury, the internal torment when someone they once controlled demonstrates autonomy and strength. Their fascination mixes with rage because your transformation contradicts the narrative they constructed about you. Finally, they are haunted by loss. Deep down, they know they destroyed something irreplaceable. Your love, your care, your stability. Psychologists note that narcissists rarely comprehend genuine emotional connection. Realizing they lost it forever leaves them in silent despair. Your absence is not just emptiness. It is a permanent testament to their defeat and your victory. They secretly think you are beyond their reach. The doors they once expected to open with your compassion, forgiveness, and desire to appease them are now firmly closed. And that truth, psychologists emphasize, is the most agonizing realization of all. That you have not only left but grown into someone they can never control. They think that version of you no longer exists. Psychologists describe this as the narcissistic loss of supply panic. The realization that the person they once controlled, the version molded to fit their narrative, is gone forever. This thought terrifies them, because it shatters the illusion of permanence they rely on for self-esteem. In secret, they plot ways to break your silence. Their minds construct grand gestures, dramatic apologies, or even false transformations, anything to lure you back. Yet psychologists note that beneath these imagined reconciliations lies a deep-seated fear. The fear that no matter what they do, you will not respond. That possibility traps them in endless cycles of what if, leaving them restless, obsessed, and powerless. They secretly view you as their greatest loss. Even if they have moved on or found a new source of attention, they cannot erase the awareness that you were irreplaceable. Psychologists identify this as narcissistic regret, a bitter mix of longing and resentment for a loss they caused themselves. Your silence becomes the haunting reminder of what they destroyed, the truth that control, manipulation, and charm cannot reclaim what is truly lost. Paranoia creeps in. They wonder if those around you, the friends, family, or acquaintances, see the truth they've tried so desperately to conceal. Psychologists explain that narcissists are acutely sensitive to reputation because their fragile self-image depends on perception. Your absence, your silence, casts a spotlight on their deception, leaving them anxious and unsettled. Your silence humbles them. Narcissists are accustomed to being chased, forgiven, and begged for another chance. When you do none of these things, psychologists observe, it disrupts their sense of dominance. They are forced to confront a reality where they are not in control, defeated, invisible, and powerless. That humiliation festers quietly, unacknowledged, but ever present. They imagine testing you with subtle gestures, a random message, a like on an old post, a fleeting interaction. Each test is designed to gauge whether you still think of them, whether you are still available in the psychic sense. But fear holds them back, the fear that silence is permanent. Psychologists call this the paradox of control. The more they try to test, the more they realize your independence is unassailable. They secretly recognize that your silence is your ultimate weapon. Unlike anger, tears, or confrontation, which they know how to manipulate, your quiet defies them. Psychologists note that narcissists thrive on reaction. When denied it, they feel powerless. How do I fight against nothing? This helplessness enrages them, because their entire identity relies on eliciting responses. Thoughts of revenge surface, but even these become impotent fantasies. They may dream of flaunting success, flaunting new relationships, or proving they've moved on. Yet psychologists highlight that revenge is hollow if the intended audience, the one whose silence matters, is absent. Your indifference robs their drama of power, leaving them trapped in a private misery of their own making. Even now, they think of you daily, even if they refuse to admit it. Psychologists describe this as obsessive rumination, the mind endlessly replaying what it cannot control. Your absence, your silence, creates a haunting presence in their psyche, a permanent mark that dominates thoughts they once assumed were theirs alone to dictate. Ultimately, what the narcissist secretly thinks about you after a long separation is a maelstrom of longing, regret, jealousy, and fear. Psychologists emphasize that their suffering stems not from love or care but from the loss of control and the shattering of their illusions. Meanwhile, your silence is the quiet victory. Peace, growth, and freedom attained, proving that you are stronger than they ever imagined.